Imagine you are holding a metal spoon in one hand and a wooden stick in the other. Both are sitting on the same table in the same room at the same time. You touch them and the spoon feels cold while the wood feels warm. Here is the unsettling question to begin with. If both objects are in the same room, at the same temperature, how can one feel cold and the other warm? Most people never really sit with that puzzle. They just say metal is cold and wood is warm, as if that were an explanation rather than a description. But if you pause here, something important cracks open, because your intuition is lying to you gently and convincingly. Now let's slow down and think like nature does, not like human language does. The room is not full of coldness that sticks to metal. There is no invisible cold fluid soaking into steel. There is only motion, tiny particles vibrating and moving. That motion is what we call heat. Heat is not a substance, it is activity. The metal and the wood are both at the same temperature, which means on average their particles are moving with similar energy. But metal conducts that motion into your hand very quickly. Wood does not. The spoon pulls energy out of your skin fast, so you feel cold. The wood lets your skin stay warm, so you feel warm. So the first big misconception about heat is simple but deep. People treat heat like a thing that exists in objects, rather than a process that happens between them. That shift from heat is stuff to heat is motion changes everything. Now watch how this way of thinking spreads beyond physics. If you believed heat was a thing stored inside objects, you would make predictable mistakes. You would think some materials contain cold or contain heat. You would assume the spoon is naturally cold and the wood is naturally warm. You would stop asking how energy actually moves. In other words, you would confuse appearance with reality. That mistake is not limited to science. It runs straight through money, success, and human behavior. People often treat wealth the same way they treat heat. They imagine money as a kind of magical substance that sits inside people. They say that person has wealth, as if it were a static thing stored in their body. But wealth, like heat, is not really a substance. It is a process. It is the result of countless small exchanges, decisions, incentives, trust, and systems over time. It flows. It moves. It responds. Here is a second thought experiment. Imagine two people with the same salary. One spends everything the moment they get paid. The other saves slowly, invests patiently, and avoids unnecessary risks. After 10 years, one is wealthy and the other is not. Most people explain this by saying one person is good with money and the other is bad. But that is still surface level. The deeper truth is that wealth behaved like heat. It moved according to rules, not feelings. It flowed toward patience, not excitement. Now let's return to heat, because the parallel is precise. If you put your hand near a fire, heat flows into you. If you put ice near your hand, heat flows out of you. The direction of flow depends on differences, not labels. Similarly, money flows toward people who create value, reduce mistakes, and think long-term, not toward those who feel smartest or most confident. This brings us to an uncomfortable truth. Most people do not lose in life because they are stupid. They lose because they are reactive. They feel a little heat, panic, excitement, fear, and they act immediately, like a hand jerking away from a flame. But real progress usually requires staying still longer than your emotions want. That is not a moral failure. It is a human one. Now let's go back to temperature, because another misconception hides there. Temperature is not heat. Temperature is a measure of average motion. Heat is the transfer of energy. You can have a small cup of boiling water and a giant block of cold ice. The water has higher temperature, but the ice contains far more total energy. Drop the boiling water onto the ice, and it barely changes anything. Drop the ice into the water, and it transforms the water completely. Most people assume higher temperature equals more power. That feels intuitive, but it is wrong. In life, people make the same error. They assume intensity equals importance. The loudest person in the room feels powerful. The hottest market feels like the best opportunity. The most exciting trend feels like the future. But real influence often comes from size, not heat, from consistency, not drama, from slow accumulation, not bursts of intensity. Here is another uncomfortable truth. Being busy feels productive, but it is often just heat without movement. The person running in circles is hot, sweaty, and exhausted, yet they have gone nowhere. Heat without direction is noise. Motion without purpose is wasted energy. Now consider insulation. A thermos keeps coffee hot, not by adding heat, but by preventing loss. It slows down the flow of energy. That idea is devastatingly important. Most people try to get rich by chasing big wins, better jobs, hotter investments, faster growth. But a quieter, more reliable strategy is simply to avoid losing what you already have. If you stop making catastrophic mistakes, your life improves almost automatically. This is true in physics and in finance. A house stays warm, not because it constantly creates heat, but because it minimizes leakage. Wealth grows not because someone is a genius, but because they avoid stupidity for long enough. Here is a third uncomfortable truth. Patience often beats intelligence. The slightly above average person who waits calmly will outperform a brilliant person who is impatient and reckless. That teaches this perfectly. If you apply intense heat too quickly to glass, it cracks. If you warm it slowly, it becomes stronger. Nature rewards gradual change. Now let's push deeper. Why does heat flow at all? Because differences exist. Energy moves from high to low, from fast to slow, from concentrated to spread out. That tendency toward balance is one of the most fundamental forces in the universe. Society works similarly. Extreme inequalities create pressure. People compete, bargain, trade, and adapt. Over time, systems tend to move towards stability unless something blocks them. Wealthy people at their best do not think about money as grabbing more. They think about systems, incentives, and equilibrium. They ask, where will resources naturally flow if nothing foolish interferes? That way of thinking is quiet, but powerful. Now pause for a moment and ask, does this actually make sense? If heat is just motion, then cold is not a thing. It is simply the absence of fast motion. Cold does not travel. Heat does. In the same way, failure is not an active force hunting you. It is simply what happens when good habits are absent. You do not need to chase failure. You only need to stop doing what works. That is both liberating and disturbing. Most people imagine success as something you must aggressively hunt down, but often success is what happens when you stop sabotaging yourself. Here is another analogy. Imagine a room full of air. The air molecules are moving randomly, colliding, spreading out. If you open a door, air flows naturally until pressure equalizes. You do not need to push the air. The system moves on its own. Similarly, if you create value, build trust, and act rationally over long periods, opportunities tend to drift toward you. You do not need to chase every shiny idea. Now consider fire again. Fire feels dramatic. It crackles, glows, and demands attention. But the sun, which sustains all life, is mostly steady, silent, and distant. Most people are drawn to fire-like opportunities. Flashy careers, viral trends, get-rich-quick schemes. But real progress is sunlight, slow, constant, and boring. Here's the final uncomfortable truth. Most people fail, not because the world is unfair, but because they refuse to accept how the world actually works. They want heat without motion, wealth without patience, results without trade-offs. But physics does not negotiate, and neither does reality. Heat reminds us that everything is connected through cause and effect. You cannot touch something without being touched in return. You cannot change a system without being changed by it. If you warm a room, the room warms you. If you shape your habits shape you. So what is the big misconception about heat? It is not just that heat is motion. It is that people mistake appearances for mechanisms. They see what feels obvious and stop there. And that mistake echoes everywhere. They see a rich person and think, they have something I do not. They see success and think, it must come from brilliance. They see risk and think, more danger means more reward. But when you slow down, you see something different. You see that wealth often comes from avoiding foolish losses, not making heroic gains. You see that temperature is not power. You see that energy moves according to simple rules, not human wishes. And you begin to trust process over drama. At the end of the day, heat is not a mysterious force. It is just particles moving, transferring energy, seeking balance. Life is similar. It is not magic. It is patterns, feedback, and time. If you want a warmer house, you insulate it. If you want a better life, you insulate your decisions from panic, ego, and impulsive thinking. If you want to understand the world, you stop asking what things are called and start asking how they behave. So next time you touch a metal spoon and it feels cold, remember, nothing cold is touching you. Energy is simply moving. And when you look at success, remember, nothing magical is sitting inside other people. Results are simply flowing from consistent behavior. In both cases, the truth is quieter than the story, but far more powerful. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson heat can teach us. Reality rewards those who understand how things actually work, not those who shout the loudest about how they feel. Now let's go even deeper, because the idea of heat quietly dissolves some of our most comforting illusions. Picture a simple cup of hot tea sitting on a table. At first, the tea is steaming. You can see the mist rising. It feels alive, active, powerful. Over time, the steam fades. The surface becomes still. Eventually, the tea is just another object in the room. Most people think the tea lost heat, but that phrasing hides something subtle. The tea did not lose heat the way you lose your keys. Nothing escaped into some separate place called cold. Instead, the energy spread out into the air, the table, the cup, and even your eyes when you looked at it. Heat did not disappear. It diluted. That idea is uncomfortable because it mirrors human life too closely. When someone works extremely hard for a few years and then burns out, we say they lost their motivation. But motivation did not vanish. It simply spread into stress, fatigue, resentment, distraction, and confusion. Energy diffuses when there is no structure to guide it. This is why wealthy people in the deepest sense do not obsess over earning more. They obsess over building systems that prevent energy, money, and effort from leaking away. Most people do the opposite. They focus on how hot they can get, how intense, driven, and ambitious they can appear, without realizing that unmanaged intensity is just heat bleeding into empty space. Pause here and ask, does this actually make sense? If you were designing a machine that needed to run for decades, you would not make it burn at maximum temperature all the time. You would design it for stability, efficiency, and durability. Yet in our personal lives, we worship burnout like a badge of honor. That is not strength. That is poor engineering. Now let's introduce another simple but profound idea. Heat always moves along paths of least resistance. It does not argue, it does not strategize, it simply flows where it is easiest to flow. If you build a metal rod with one end in fire, heat travels smoothly along it. If you wrap part of the rod in insulation, the heat slows there but keeps moving elsewhere. Human behavior works the same way. Money flows toward low friction. Talent flows toward environments that respect it. Effort flows toward incentives that reward it. People do not need to be persuaded if the structure already guides them. This leads to another quiet but unsettling realization. Most people think success is about making better decisions moment by moment, but often success is about building better environments around yourself so that good decisions become the path of least resistance. If your friends all exercise, eat well, and think long term, you will drift in that direction. If your friends gamble, overspend, and chase shortcuts, you will drift there instead. You are not as independent as you feel. You are more like a heat particle carried by a larger current. Here is another thought experiment. Imagine two identical houses in winter. One has thin walls and poor insulation. The other is well insulated. To stay warm, the first house needs a roaring fire constantly. The second needs only a small, steady flame. Which house is more intelligently designed? Obviously the second. Yet most people design their lives like the first house. They rely on constant bursts of willpower, motivation, and adrenaline instead of quiet structural advantages. They treat discipline like fuel rather than architecture. Now think about boiling water. You can crank the stove to maximum, make the water violently bubble, and feel productive. But once the water reaches boiling point, extra heat does not make it more boiled. It just wastes energy. In life, many people confuse more effort with better results. They work harder without asking whether they are working in the right direction. Heat again exposes the mistake. More intensity does not change the fundamental state of a system once a threshold is reached. You need different conditions, not just more fire. This connects to another uncomfortable truth about success. Most people try to outwork their problems instead of redesigning their situation. They push harder rather than rethink the setup. Now consider ice melting. When you put ice in a warm room, it does not instantly turn to water. It goes through a phase transition, a slow, invisible process where structure breaks down before anything obvious happens. For a while, nothing seems to change. The ice looks solid. Then suddenly, it begins to drip. Change often works like this in real life. People expect dramatic overnight transformations, but real shifts in habits, wealth, relationships, or understanding usually happen quietly for a long time before becoming visible. Most people quit during the invisible phase. They assume nothing is happening, when in fact the structure is already softening. This is where patience beats intelligence. A smart but impatient person gives up too early. A less brilliant but steady person waits long enough to see the phase change. Now let's circle back to the original metal spoon. When you touch it, your nerves do not measure temperature. They measure rate of heat flow. You feel how fast energy is leaving your skin. This is a beautiful metaphor for how we judge people. We do not actually see their character, wisdom, or depth. We sense how they affect us in the moment, their tone, confidence, speed, and emotional energy. A calm person can feel cold, even if they are deeply thoughtful. A loud person can feel warm, even if they are reckless. We confuse sensation with truth. In the same way, flashy investors feel impressive, even when their strategy is dangerous. Quiet, boring investors feel dull, even when they are winning slowly. Heat tricks the senses. Life does too. Now imagine a huge lake on a hot day. The surface may look calm, but deep below, currents are moving, mixing and shifting temperature. From above, you see stillness. Beneath, there is constant motion. The same is true of successful people. Their external life may look simple and relaxed, but beneath that is a well-structured set of habits, systems, and principles guiding everything. Most people only see the surface and assume nothing is happening. Now think about a thermostat. It does not care about emotion. It simply measures temperature and adjusts heat accordingly. If the room is too cold, it turns on. If it is too warm, it turns off. A rational mind works similarly. Instead of reacting dramatically, it notices feedback and adjusts gradually. No ego, no panic, just calibration. This is what people misunderstand about smart decision making. They imagine brilliance as constant prediction, but often intelligence is simply good correction. You make small moves, watch the results, and change course. Heat systems teach this perfectly. They are self-regulating, not heroic. Now consider a blacksmith heating metal. If the metal is heated too quickly, it becomes brittle and cracks. If heated slowly, it becomes strong and flexible. People are the same. Extreme pressure in short bursts can break someone. Consistent, moderate challenge over time builds resilience. Yet our culture glorifies shock, sudden success, overnight fame, rapid wealth, without acknowledging the hidden costs. Now let's return to the big misconception. People think heat is something objects have. They imagine it sitting inside them like a stored treasure. But in reality, heat only exists in movement between things. Likewise, people think success is something you possess. But success is really a pattern of interactions between you and the world. Your choices, relationships, incentives, and environment. You do not own success. You participate in it. That realization is humbling. It means you cannot simply grab success. You must align with how systems naturally operate. Now picture a candle in a dark room. The flame is small, but it transforms the entire space. Shadows stretch across walls. Air warms. Light spreads. One tiny source of heat can influence everything around it. Similarly, one small habit, reading daily, saving consistently, thinking carefully before acting, can reshape an entire life over years. People overestimate big actions and underestimate tiny repeated ones. Heat again shows the truth. Small, continuous energy beats sporadic intensity. Now pause again. Does this make sense? If heat spreads naturally, then trying to hoard it is pointless. If wealth flows naturally toward value, then trying to hoard money without creating value is also pointless. Both are systems that punish greed and reward alignment. Finally, think about entropy, the tendency of systems to become more disordered over time. Left alone, hot things cool, structures decay, habits slip, and chaos increases. This is not cruelty. It is simply how the universe works. So if you want warmth, order, or success, you must continuously act gently, steadily, intelligently against that drift. Not with panic, not with drama, with patience. And here is the quiet conclusion. All of this leads to understanding heat is not really about physics. It is about learning to see beyond appearances, to trust mechanisms over feelings, and to respect slow, invisible processes. The metal spoon was never cold. Your reaction, success is not a possession. Your habits are. Life does not reward brilliance alone. It rewards alignment with reality. If you walk away with anything, let it be this. Do not chase heat. Build insulation. Do not chase intensity. Build structure. Do not chase sudden wins. Avoid stupid losses. And when something feels obvious, like metal is cold or hard work equals success, pause, look closer, and ask what is actually moving beneath the surface. Because often, the biggest misconceptions are not lies. They are simply shallow truths that no one bothered to examine. And the deeper you look, the more you see that physics, money, and human behavior are all variations of the same story. Energy flows, systems evolve, time compounds, and patience, more than anything else, separates those who merely react to the world from those who quietly understand it.